Thank you, Heather. Good afternoon, everyone, and happy fall. I'm so pleased to introduce our two speakers today. Annie Quaid, who works in the Advancement Office at the University of Missouri. She's an advancement officer and works on gift planning and other ways to engage with alumni and other stakeholders of the university. And we also have Alan Whittington, who is the department chair of the Department of Geological Sciences at the University of Missouri. Today, they're going to tell us a little bit about some fundraising 101 type sort of information, and then some really concrete examples of how the Advancement Office and Alan have worked together to raise funds for various programs and things in their department. So without further ado, take it away.
Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Annie Quaid. I'm excited to be here, and if we can go on to the next slide, we'll give you an idea of what we're going to be talking about today. I'm just going to go over some basics of advancement. Alan's going to jump into some alumni engagement examples. We'll go over a little bit about major fundraising campaigns, talk through some case studies, and then see what questions you all have. So to get us started, just to go very basic 101 of advancement, I like to think of our work in this continuum of engagement. So everything, of course, is going to start with our students. Every campus interaction that they have is shaping how they're going to be future alumni and donors for you. That includes your interactions in the classroom with faculty, any of the student orgs they participate in, Greek life, etc. Next, we're going to change over into being alumni. And we want to start to woo them, if you will. So we start coming up with some of those engagement opportunities starting as recent grads and into being alumni. Those might be local alumni chapters and clubs. You might send newsletters, magazines, host phone-a-thon events to get those first annual fund level gifts, etc. These are all going to be designed to bring about those warm and fuzzy feelings, so that as they head into later in their career and they're making a bit more money, we're going to hope that they become major donors. And that's where us as gift officers are going to come in, having those face-to-face visits. Yes, we get to do the wine and dine, all that fun stuff. But we're also working with departments to come up with what are those really meaningful engagement opportunities, whether that's serving on a board, having scholarship banquets to introduce scholarship donors to their recipients, gift announcements, anything and everything that's going to cultivate and steward them to continue giving. And lastly, we just have advancement services. We just want to remind you that it's not just the frontline fundraisers who are doing this work, but we have a whole host of other people doing stuff in the background, from researching our prospects, helping us come up with great communication and marketing materials, helping us manage gift processing, IT, all that good stuff. In the next slide, we'll see what is the basic goal of being a gift officer. So obviously we're going to want the very most generous gift that we can possibly get, that transformational gift. And we need it to happen in the shortest time possible, right? Because we needed money yesterday. The next thing is really important also. We want this to be for an organizational priority. Of course, we want the donor and the donor's intent to always be first and foremost, but we also want to make sure that their intent and the dream that they have is also realistic with what your department or the school or college actually needs to happen. Of course, we're going to be doing all of this in an ethical and professional manner, and we want it to result in inspired and joyous giving that deepens their engagement with the school or college or department, and is going to create a lifelong, trusting, productive, and satisfying relationship. And that's really important because on the next slide, we're going to see that a donor stays in the donor cycle for their entire lifetime. Just because someone's made a very large cash gift doesn't mean that they may be done with their giving. So we are constantly keeping donors in this cycle of researching and planning, engaging, asking, closing, and stewarding them, even after they've made a legacy gift in some regard. A legacy gift is typically going to be the largest lifetime gift, and that's made through a planned gift or a bequest. And just because someone has made that gift doesn't necessarily mean that they're finished giving. Circumstances change all the time for donors, and you never know when they're going to receive an inheritance they didn't expect to receive before they died, or anything else that could potentially happen that might encourage them to continue giving large cash gifts even after they've made a legacy gift. Next, we're going to look at a major gift pyramid, and this just outlines how donors move through, typically with time and with engagement, from being just our constituents and first-time donors all the way up to making those lifetime legacy gifts. The factors that are going to impact that can be everything from your email and web and social media, all the way up to face-to-face interactions, bringing a dean along on a donor visit, any of those things. So that's going to lead us into what are the opportunities for engagement that we can provide that are going to be meaningful in moving donors up this pyramid. Next. So here's some examples of what really meaningful engagement is going to include. So obviously it's going to be a two-way interactive opportunity. We want to look for ways to keep everything away from being so passive and more to being actively involved. We want to do anything that we can to generate an interaction between the donor and the department. We want to also have opportunities that advance the mission and vision and concretely are helpful. So opportunities where you as the chair or the department head can communicate where you're hoping to have the department go is going to be really useful as the donor's considering where their interest lies in making their gift. Additionally, we want to make sure that this is going to be personally meaningful and satisfying to the donor. That's where partnering with your advancement team is going to be really helpful, because as we make these face-to-face visits, we're going to learn that Mr. Smith really doesn't like public displays of recognition. He'd rather just have a one-on-one conversation and hear from you as the dean or the chair instead of having a big gift announcement in front of a bunch of people with cameras. So figuring out what's really personally meaningful to the donor is going to be really important. And then additionally, we're going to have the engagement opportunities are going to have think, feel, and do components. And we're going to talk about that more on the next slide too. So the thinking components are going to be opportunities where we talk about what potential obstacles are going to be overcome with the gift. They're going to be things that build trust and in-depth organizational knowledge. The feel components are things that we want to do that make the donor feel like they're a superhero. Anything that gives them the opportunity to live the impact. This is where students really can become a huge factor for you to consider. Any opportunity you have to remind the donor what exactly the impact is going to be, the better. And then lastly, the do component is just going to be, it inspires some action. It's going to give them the motivation to say, yes, I need to make this gift right now at that amount. Let's make it happen. And then on the next slide, we'll wrap up engagement criteria in that we just want to make sure that this is an opportunity to strategically move the donor forward. Every time that a donor is going to come to campus or be around, we just want to make sure that we're being proactive instead of reactive so that we're being strategic in everything. But I just want to remind you that you're not alone in this. Your colleagues in the advancement shop can help you plan and strategize and think about unique opportunities when you have these donors. And next up is Alan.
All right, so yeah, in this first section, I'm just going to talk about concrete examples of alumni engagement that we do and some things I've learned in the last few years. So to reiterate what Annie just said, the first thing is not to tackle this single-handed. It's to get help, work with the development office to find contact information for your alumni. Hopefully, you already have a group of alumni that are in contact with the department. And hopefully, when you become chair, you might get a database from previous chairs, for example. Our development board has been around for quite a long time. So I didn't have to do any of that. I just had to continue and help continue work that was already in progress, basically. So the easiest and most effective way to engage with alumni, I think, is a couple of things. One is kind of direct email and social media, and another is to have a development board. The development board is really useful because you actually get time to have proper conversations with people and find out what things are of interest to alumni of different generations. You get to learn interesting things about the history of the department and often some interesting stories about recently retired faculty members. Anyway, so this is just a photo taken our last board meeting. It's not everybody by any means, but it's just to remind me to mention the range of different alumni we have on our board. So we have alumni, many from the oil and gas industry, but close to 50% of the board are either active in or fairly recently retired from oil and gas. We have quite a few in the environmental and geotech industries. We've got at least one from the US Geological Survey, one or two from the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, and we also make sure that we have 2 current graduate students as well. So, right, I think that's reminding me everybody that's on there. Our development board started, actually I don't remember exactly, but it's more than 30 years ago, and that was when I became chair. That was one of the most important things I knew I had to continue this tradition. Next slide, please. So in addition to having a board, we have biannual meetings. We have a big meeting in the spring, which most people manage to attend, and we have a smaller meeting in the fall, which is typically the steering committee for more in-depth discussion among a smaller group. So as well as those face-to-face meetings, of course, we also do a lot of social media and mailing. So the first thing about social media, I set up the department Facebook page. I have not yet set up a department Twitter account. I should do that. And I definitely haven't done a department Instagram account. I should probably do that as well. Bear in mind that your different social media outlets are going to reach different alumni audiences. I'm not the expert in this, but I do know just generally that Facebook is preferred by older generations. Twitter, most of our grad students mostly look at Twitter. Apparently Instagram is what the university focuses on for recruiting undergrads. And obviously this is a fairly rapidly changing landscape as well. So yeah, just bear in mind that what you put out on the different social media sites is actually going to reach distinctly different demographics. One thing that always works is, of course, to mail a newsletter. And I think this is still appreciated by older generations who are used to receiving newsletters in the mail. It's also actually something of a novelty, I think, to our most recent graduates who pretty much don't do anything with the mail anymore. They do everything electronically. So these are the last 3 covers. The magazine has grown actually every year. It's now about 50 pages, something like that. We started doing a big color center section. There are other departments that do, some of you may be alumni of some of the bigger geoscience departments in the country, and I routinely receive a couple of them. They're often big glossy magazine type things. Ours started off smaller. It's a bit bigger now. The color has a huge impact. It's really not that expensive to do. We send out close to 1,000 copies. It's and I think it has a really big impact. In it, we include obviously there's a letter from myself. There's a letter from the chair of the development board. There's updates on students, degrees conferred, field trips, lots of stuff about field trips, field work, field camp, honors and awards. And of course, a list of all the scholarships and who they've been supporting. Okay, next, please. So again, I've had just over 4 years to learn some things about development. I'm not the best student, but a couple of things I have learned. One is focus on one thing at a time. So we have a wide range of scholarships for both undergrad and graduate students. We have some other funds, including funds focusing on faculty retention. So we have several different places that people could donate money, field camp as well. So the important thing, though, is to focus on one priority at a time. Some alumni, they have their thing. It may be a scholarship in their name. They may feel very, very dedicated to field camp. but not too worried about other things going on in the department. They may have one issue that they're always going to give to help with that and nothing else. And that's fine. We greatly appreciate the gifts. But strategically, we try to focus on one goal at a time. I always try to articulate what our main priority is, and any checks that come in that just say, put this in wherever you need it to go most, all of those checks go to whatever we've said is where we need it most, because that's what it is. So we do try to articulate what we're doing, what we're aiming for, why, and make sure that we advertise it. And then finally, Annie actually began with, start with students. Absolutely. I mean, we're a department at a R1 institution, so we've got everything from PhD students through to undergrads. But for at least most of us, I think, the most fun we have in research is actually working with students. There's a reason we're at a university, not a research institute. And students drive our reason for being here, for doing what we do. And so everything, whatever the fundraising goal is, it's actually all intended directly or indirectly for the benefit of students. So an example of that, obviously, scholarships for students. That's easy. That goes directly to the student. What about faculty retention? Well, that also helps students. If you can keep the best faculty, which hopefully by best we mean the students, the faculty that are best at both research and teaching, that's good for the students. So ultimately, we want to be the best department that we can, and our primary, the primary audience we serve is the students. So we really always put them front and center. And back to Annie.
Ready for the next slide. Thank you. All right, so let's say you're sitting here listening to this and you are all fired up. You're like, yes, Alan, you're speaking my language. Annie, I'm ready. We're doing a major fundraising campaign. We want to raise $1 million for whatever that priority is going to be. So the first thing that is really important to understand is the difference between an endowment and an annual fund, kind of gift or fund. So the endowment is going to be your long-term savings account. This is where the gifts are going to be invested, and it's going to live on in perpetuity. The annual fund is more like your checking account. It's the every year regular expenses. You're going to get a lot more smaller gifts that do make a large impact, but more than often than not, those are going to be where your smaller gifts are going to come in, is more towards that annual fund. You may meet some donors who want to set up their own endowments in their own names. That might be a scholarship. And you can always pool those individual endowments to be under one big endowment that's going towards your one development goal, like Alan was discussing. Then on the next slide, we are going to revisit this gift pyramid. So now that you've decided that you want to undergo a major fundraising campaign, you're going to work with your advancement office to identify how many donors do we need at each level, and how many prospects do we have with that capacity to figure out if this is feasible or not. So if you know that you're going to be trying to raise $3 million for a project, you're going to want to work with your advancement team to see, okay, how many geology prospects do we have with a capacity over 1 million? Because I know I'm going to need at least one person to give me 1 million. And so we're going to need to make sure that we just have enough prospects there that this whole campaign is going to be feasible. And again, you don't have to come up with all this on your own. Your advancement or development staff is going to be able to take a look at the database, help you run this feasibility study. Next, going back to this donor cycle that we looked at, I just want to remind you to be patient. Major gifts take time. Sometimes it seems like too much time, but we got to make sure we're getting it right, especially for our donors. If we're going to keep them in this cycle and make sure that they're not just giving us only one gift, but they continue to be lifelong donors to your department. So keep in mind, 18 to 24 months is about the time frame that we expect major gifts to come in. Next, other potential to-dos that you're going to run into potentially. Endowment approval may need to go through your board of curators or board of trustees. You might also have to have your general counsel or legal team look at the endowment document and approve the language. This happens whether it's an individual donor coming up with a scholarship that they want to fund, or as your entire department coming up with your one priority and big endowment fund that you want to set up. You might also need to be working with your marketing and communications team to come up with new marketing materials to really promote your one goal that you're going to have now. Online giving pages are another great way to pool resources from donors. A lot of times these won't necessarily be major gifts, but if you can get a lot of people to give little dollars, like the base of that pyramid that we just saw, that's going to be really important to getting you to your goals still. Again, next, you're going to want to probably work with your advancement colleagues in order to make sure that your project is included in school and college-wide solicitations. Alan's currently working with the College of Arts and Science to make sure that the Geology Fund is in the annual fund mailing appeal that's going to go out to every single Arts and Science alum, which is a lot more people than just the Geology department. And then lastly is you might want to consider having what we call a silent phase to build up support before you publicly announce your one goal, especially if this is going to be a pretty hefty goal. Having that silent phase in order to make sure that you're going to hit your goal, or that you already have some support to announce when you go public, can really help build momentum and get more donors to feel like they want to be a part of it. It's kind of like the millennials say about fear of missing out, the FOMO thing. You want your donors to feel like they want to be a part of this and they don't want to mess that up. So, oh gosh, look at how many people have already donated. I should get on that bus too. Next. You're up.
Oh. All right, so I'm going to go through 4 case studies of things that that have happened in our department, not all while I've been chair, but over the last 10 years or so, as examples. I always find that concrete examples are the most useful way of finding things out. Before I begin with the case studies, I also forgot to mention earlier the other things that a development board can help you with. Obviously, fundraising is one really important thing, hence the word development in the title. But that's not the only purpose of the development board. So it also provides networking for students, especially with those alumni still in or recently in industry or government employment. So it can help with student placement, potentially could be used for student recruitment, and it can also be a voice in the dean's ear, especially if you have one or more members who might be on a college level advisory or development board as well. Anyway, but back to the case studies. So the first one is an endowment that incorporates many scholarships within it. It's a slightly unusual arrangement. The second one is a bridge we had to replace at our field camp. The third one is ongoing, a new endowed professorship that we're raising money for at the moment. And the fourth is student research funds, just a couple of examples of things to do that don't require a lot of money, but have a great effect. So next, please. So the Geology Student Scholarship Fund, GSSF, is an endowment that we have set up, and this started, it was around a decade ago, maybe even a couple of years before that. So it is a single endowment, but within it, it has about 12 different named scholarships, each of which needs to make its own minimum amount before it actually starts producing income that is put into a spendable pool. So most of them are now doing that. There might be one at this point that still hasn't. Some of these are named for faculty. So we have a selection of about 4 or 5 long-serving faculty members, all of whom are retired. But they were very important in the department, had a lot of students, and had a great impact on many people's lives over many decades. So that's one way to attract donors. Some, especially if you have larger donors who might be in a position to get towards or beyond that 25,000 minimum, they may just want to go ahead and name their own individual fund within that. And we also have an unnamed pool, so for all the donations, if someone doesn't want to give to a particular faculty member, at least none of the ones we chose, and they don't want to give to any of the funds that are named after other alumni, there's also just a general pool as well. This came about as originally it was used to help us increase our TA stipends for the grad students, so which had been stagnant for many years. The dean at that time said yes, he could make an increase if we could match it through alumni funds. The dean's increase was done immediately as soon as the endowment was launched, and then the alumni stepped up and matched it much faster than original expectations. Actually, it was a great success, and this provides for a long time we used it as additional scholarships to supplement the TA stipends. Actually, the university recently increased its TA stipends, so now we use them for summer support, and it's a great recruiting tool for grad students to be able to guarantee them 1.5 months of summer support every year. Next, please. Okay, the second example is at our field camp. Now we are a smaller department. Most small departments or smaller departments don't have their own field camp necessarily. We do. It's in the Wind River Mountains in Wyoming in Sinks Canyon. It's wonderful. It's probably the single thing that our alumni are most excited about, and for good reason. It's clearly the highlight of every student's undergraduate career, as it should be. Anyway, it's leased from the Forest Service, a long-term lease, and it's the actual buildings are on an island in the middle of a creek that comes down from the Wind River Mountains, and every spring when the snow melts, actually up there it's kind of summer when the snow finally melts, we get very, very high water, and the bridge that was there was declared no longer safe. In fact, there's another bridge on the other side that actually got completely washed away. That's just a footbridge. This was a more serious issue because this is the bridge that we drive vehicles over to get to the cabins where people stay, and also the lab and the dining room. And we need to be able to drive things there. So the university was unwilling to help. That's the central campus. Because this was really something that had happened over time. It wasn't a single catastrophic event. The footbridge on the other side that got washed away, that just happened in one flood and it just went. That got replaced by the university, but they would not do that for this bridge. So we set about fundraising. The main reason I put this example in is that our field camp, we have many field camp alumni that do not graduate from MU. Right? So our camp is open to students from all across the country, and more than half of our field camp graduates are not MU students, but we add them to our alumni list. We keep in contact with them, and some of them are absolutely still, like hearing from us every year. So there's a whole section of the newsletter that is dedicated to field camp, and they will give money to support field camp because they recognize what a difference it made to them. So we managed to raise $250,000 in 2 years. Again, mostly from a couple of major donors. So as Annie mentioned, one of the things I've learned, you need a few major donors, and then the many small donations, they help towards the end, but you're not going to achieve a major goal just from small donations. Next, please. Onto the endowed professorship. This is recently approved, actually, finally by the Board of Curators, approved over the summer, and we're now launching the major fundraising phase for this. We had an alum who actually just joined the development board and was very enthusiastic about raising funds for an endowed chair in carbonates. So I put a picture. There's a carbonate that I found in a creek hiking a few weeks ago. Anyway, so I'm an igneous petrologist, so I have to remind myself what carbonates are. Anyway, the endowed chairs on campus, the minimum amount you can raise is $2.5 million. And Annie talked through the donor pyramid for a $3 million aim, and you'll see that requires probably a donor of 1 million, and 10 at 100,000, and so on down the pyramid. Well, the alum that initially proposed the idea was not in a position to launch this with $1 million gift, and so we started talking about it. We talked about this for quite a long time. The amount we would need to actually make a real endowed chair that would lock up our fundraising for a decade, bearing in mind that we do some of our fundraising, of course, is spent on students and on field camp and so on. So we'd be looking at locking up fundraising for a decade to bring in somebody who, in a field that had been chosen now, but will be joining the department more than a decade hence. We, along I'm sure with many other departments, have undergone a few changes in the last decade. So as the field of earth science, the funding landscape keeps changing, the most exciting new research areas keep changing. And really, we didn't feel that it was a good idea to lock in a decade's worth of fundraising to a particular field for some future time, because we don't know what the makeup of the department will be a decade hence. So what we did is we created an endowment that, until it hits $1 million, it produces unrestrictable spending dollars. And then when it does reach the $1 million goal, it will be called the Geology Alumni Professorship. For now, it's the Geology Alumni Endowment. And this new title, the Geology Alumni Professor, will actually go to a junior faculty member. It'll be a 3-year award, and the money will be used to augment startup. It could be used to support a graduate student. It could be used for summer salary. We are not specifying a field. It's a 3-year award, so we can keep using this. It'll go for 3 years, and then hopefully we'll get a new faculty member and award it for 3 years, and that will just keep on rolling. One thing I have noticed is that deans really like to make sure they're using money for specific awards. When it's available, they want to use it. Well, this one, if they want to use it, they've got to hire as a new faculty member every 3 years. So we really hope that, that the field that the hiring comes in will be up to the department at that time. So we hope that this is a good way of strongly encouraging the Dean's Office to continue adding new lines to our department. All right, next. Of course, in some ways, the easiest thing to raise money for is student research. The photo here shows, at the time, 3 undergrads. One of them then stayed and did a master's in our department. Anyway, they're out doing the GPS surveys. They're studying rock glaciers out in Colorado. We have a lot of undergrads doing research with us. We encourage students to do senior thesis. They, in many cases, get good skills where all 3 of them are now gainfully employed doing geoscience and remote sensing. And so that's great. That's our ideal outcome. So the undergrad research program started just over a decade ago, and basically undergrads can apply for up to $3,000 to do research. Obviously, they need to find a faculty mentor or advisor first who will help them with the budget stuff, because undergrads usually have no idea how much fieldwork costs or analyses or anything else. And of course, they need an advisor willing to take them on. But this really incentivizes faculty members to work with undergrads and take them into the field, which if you have a grant, to go somewhere with a grad student, bringing an undergrad with you, it costs extra money, the airfare and everything else. This means that that's not an unexpected burden on the grant. The undergrad could come along and learn alongside the grad student. And they may have money left afterwards to do a few analyses. If you have a little side project, that'd be interesting to have a quick look at that thing over there and get a couple of analyses, but it's not part of your main study or what the grad student's working on. This makes it possible. This doesn't include stipend or conference travel. The conference travel, at least, we have separate money that we use to get undergrads to a conference. And we've just started finally doing the same thing for graduate students. I guess it took us a while to get around to that. Of course, graduate students, there's things like APG, GSA grants they can apply for, but we know that the funding rates there are less than ideal as well. So now our graduate students can also apply for money. And this means if they're doing something with a faculty member that doesn't have a grant to get them in the field, this makes that possible. So this is not something that we actually did as a specific fundraising target, although I think it would be a very sympathetic one. We have another endowment, in fact, a couple of them already, which are geared towards this kind of thing. And really, what I did with the grad research thing, and I helped with the undergrad one too, was to kind of formalize the process by which undergrads could apply and grads could apply for money from the department to do research. And that was better. That removes any suggestion, you know, unthinkable though it is, that a chair might show favoritism towards some students versus others or some faculty members. This removes any of that and just, you know, here's the clear process. This is how we do it. And I love showing alumni what our students are doing. Many of them are producing, you know, peer-reviewed journal publications out of their senior theses, and it's actually excellent. That's all I've got.
I think we're ready for some questions.
Thank you both so much for your presentation. We did have some questions roll in through the course of both of your talks. Let's see. Alan, you used the word development. How is that different from advancement? And can these two words be interchanged at all?
I'm looking at Annie for confirmation because I really don't know, but she nodded. So I guess advancement and development are kind of the same thing. I mean, you know, our alumni board is called the development board, but like I said, it's not just about fundraising. That is absolutely a very important thing that they do, and we'd be lost without that. But that's not all it is. But I think in general, if it's an office of advancement at the campus level, then that's usually the same as development. And
yeah, development was a term that was used initially for the field of professional fundraising, basically for higher ed, and it has since changed to being called advancement. A big reason is exactly what Alan was saying, is that it's more than just fundraising and dollars raised. It's anything to advance the mission of the institution. So they can be used interchangeably at any time.
Okay, great, thank you. Now going back to the idea of the development board, is there some formula for how many people you need on one? Is there an ideal number?
Okay, I don't know. I can only tell you what we have. We have 22, which includes 2 student members, and we have a chair and a vice chair of the officers that get elected, and they serve 2-year terms. Usually they do 4 years at a time. Okay. But I know there are other departments in arts and science that some are just starting theirs, others are also fairly long-standing. I think 22 is, of the departments I know of, that's at the high end. But I would say probably between 10 and 16 will come to any given meeting. So so the meetings, I think, function pretty well. We've certainly been trying to make sure that there is ample time for discussion. And, you know, if you have too large of a group, then, you know, that doesn't work out so well. We've also actually recently tried splitting into smaller groups at the meeting. So instead of having, you know, 16 people, and all the faculty are invited as well. So, you know, instead of having nearly 30 people sitting around trying to talk about one thing at the same time, which a lot of people get disengaged in, we split into smaller groups of maybe 6, and they each tackle the question on their own and then report back. That works pretty well.
Okay, excellent. Now it seems like you have a pretty decent sized department. What would you consider to be a small sized department, and what would you recommend for a department without an already created list of alumni?
So I'll answer the department size. I'll let Annie answer the question about the list.
Sounds good.
So given that we're in an R1, we are a small department. And I know this because I've just done our 5-year strategic plan and gathered a whole bunch of information about number of faculty and grad students and so on for a bunch of universities that are perhaps our peers, and then some that are not. Anyway, so we have 11 faculty. It's going to be 12. So I'll just say 12. Our long-term average while I've been here has been about 13. You know, and I know people in departments that are 4 or 5. I would say here, like, the chair does most of the development stuff. It's an important part of what the chair does. And the rest of the faculty hopefully turn up to meetings and chat with the alumni when they visit. But we mostly do it as a one-person job, which is only possible because of the excellent support that we have from the campus and college development office.
And on the advancement side, in terms of not having a list of alumni,
Yeah.
I would say let's double check that that's really true. I mean, the department may not have that list, but I would imagine that somewhere in an advancement development, alumni relations, some kind of office, or at least there being one person, there's likely somebody who has a database already created. If not, your very worst case scenario would be find a very eager undergrad who wants to do a little side project, talk to the registrar's office, and start building you a database. I did previously work at a smaller institution than Mizzou. It's an all-women's college called Stevens College. They have about less than 1,000 students on campus at any given year, and I mean, we still had one person to manage the entire database, one person to do all of alumni relations, 2 people to do all of fundraising. So there was still a staff there. So I would look to see what's available already existing, and then worst case, start with the registrar and go back.
All right, great, thank you. Now this individual says that they're in a very small group with only 4 faculty in the department, and the program is brand new. And so their graduates, they have their first 3 graduates in summer, or they will in summer 2019. So the question is, how long does it usually take for new graduates to become donors? And how difficult is it to start this process when there is no precedent?
They can be a donor now. As a student, you can already start to engage them in some kind of small gift to create, you know, you really have a beautiful opportunity here just starting, to create that culture of generosity from the very beginning. Many institutions that have been around for a long time are trying to go backwards and get students to feel generous to their department after the fact, and that can be more difficult. Whereas if you can start building that culture now in the very beginning, it's going to be a lot easier for you moving forward. So, you know, you got to start them small because they're going to have student loans and all that fun stuff to deal with, but there's no reason that they can't be a donor immediately.
Good point.
I'll just say a slight counterbalance to that, I guess, is that our most of our development board are at least 10 years postgraduate, you know, post-degree. In many cases, they're closer to 50 years post-degree. Now, that's people on the development board. That's not donors, and Annie was addressing donors. Obviously, unless they leave geology and go into hedge fund management, they're not going to be in a position to be a major donor anytime soon. But I think the important thing is perhaps less the, you know, it's less the dollar figure. It is kind of an alumni culture and kind of growing the network, right? So as I mentioned, student placement, finding internships, or advice on careers is another really important thing, and that's something that actually the younger alumni are the best at and the most useful at, because they're the ones looking for jobs or who have just been hired, and they know what it's like right now. And especially in industry, that landscape changes very rapidly.
And corporate partners can always become potential funding sources for a small department as well.
Great. We have a couple of questions on the return on investment concept. Do you have any information or even anecdotal evidence about what the return on investment is for mailing out those department newsletters. The comment is it's kind of expensive for thousands of alumni, and there's a question of how do you really gauge the return on investment?
So I'll answer for our particular department. So we have an annual fund, so basically spending money, checking account, and donations to that, which are mostly of the $50 or $100 variety, but we have quite a few alumni that just send in that much every year, and that more than covers the cost of mailing the newsletter and actually having the board meetings. So for the board meetings, the alumni pay all their own expenses to travel and stay. We provide dinner at my house one evening, and then breakfast and lunch, to which the whole department, faculty, students, staff is invited the next day. And so the cost of the meetings and the newsletter is basically covered by those small annual gifts.
Another way that you can measure ROI on mailing out something of that sort will be to be tracking when you have your annual fund gifts coming in. You probably will see a peak or a little blurb of more dollars coming in following the mailing of that publication. And or you can also include some kind of solicitation as you mail that out, and then therefore track when the gifts come in based on that solicitation. Those are also things that your campus-wide annual fund appeals would be doing as well. So for example, when the College of Arts and Science sends out theirs and it includes the geology fund in that solicitation, they'll be able to go back and look and see what was the ROI on including geology in that appeal based on the oh my goodness, business return envelope that's going to be included in that mailing. That'll be coded based on which mailing went out, and looking again at that timestamp of when did that mailing go out, when did these gifts come in.
And I'll just add that our newsletter goes out in November every year, quite deliberately. It is partly an end-of-year newsletter, but also we want to be fresh in people's minds as they're looking at most giving happens at the end of the year. And we include a business return envelope with each newsletter that usually has 3 suggestions for places to put money. One is always field camp. One is always whatever our currently identified greatest need is, our main priority. And the third one is usually blank. So if they have a particular scholarship they like to give to, they can write that in.
Yeah, great. Now, thinking about endowments for a smaller mid-sized department of 12 faculty, what size are the endowment and the non-endowment funds, and what are you able to raise annually typically?
Okay, so for us it varies depending on whether we have a big campaign going or not, but I think I put up one of the slides. My estimate for what we raise, and I do have the numbers, but it varies year on year. It's of the order of $300,000 per year, although most of that is from, again, a handful of larger donations from a handful of alumni. So although that's an average, it very much depends on those key supporters. Yeah.
Okay.
Another thing that you can do is if you're trying to estimate what's a reasonable fundraising goal to make, will be what I was showing on that gift pyramid for that $3 million campaign, is go talk to your advancement team, because they can run an analysis of the prospects that you have that are coded as your alumni. We all have capacity ratings that we estimate for anybody who's in one of those databases. So we can estimate, what John Smith potentially has as a donor, and then fill in those numbers of how many prospects do you have at each of those levels of the pyramid. And that'll help you figure out that feasibility of how much is a reasonable fundraising campaign. Because it's great if you want to raise $3 million, but if you only have one prospect rated over $1 million and you haven't talked to them for 20 years, how likely is it that you're going to get that one prospect to give you $1 million? Might be pretty tough. But if you have, 100 prospects rated over $1 million, then it's going to be a lot more likely that one of those 100 are going to be willing to make that gift, especially if some of them have been engaged with the department lately.
And I'll just add that, of those major gifts, some of those are estate gifts, which we're always grateful to receive, but we never wish for. So that also greatly adds to the variability year on year. And I think I was just going to look it up, but I think our kind of regular donations, not including estate gifts, would be under 200,000 a year, more like 150 to 200.
Okay, yeah, there was a question about clarifying the sizes of the funds.
Of the donations or of our funds?
I think of the donations.
Yeah, so I don't to hand have statistics on the number for different amounts, but anecdotally,
they mean the funds total, actually.
Oh, the funds. Okay, well, so the aim for the Geology Alumni Endowment is for it to reach at least $1 million, whereupon it will be renamed the Geology Alumni Professorship.
Mm-hmm.
So one really cool thing about that, I should have mentioned in the meantime, is that all that unrestricted money that comes off that before it reaches the $1 million, we're still using it actually to help recruit and hire junior faculty members. They just don't get the title yet.
Right.
But in terms of the donations, yeah, most of the donations we get are of the order of $50, $100.
Okay, excellent.
But the ones that really, move the needle are the $100,000 kind, and each of them is extremely impactful.
And I will say, sometimes you never know when your very best legacy donor can be the little old lady who's been giving you $20 every year for 45 years, and then all of a sudden you get this estate gift worth a whole lot of money. So you just never know sometimes who those main donors are going to be.
And that's actually a great segue into the next question. Do you, as the department, send thank yous to every donor, even those small ones like that? Are ever any of the small tokens of appreciation, do you send them out to those donors at all? Yeah,
so yes, every donor gets a thank you. And for the small donations, we now do, it's basically a form letter. For for larger donations, and we have a number and I forget where it is, but certainly if it's $1,000 or more, then they get a more personal letter that that is actually signed and things like that. So yeah, we definitely do always acknowledge. I mean, apart from anything else, obviously they need the tax statement. The university that takes care of that. But yeah, we write thank you letters.
Do you do anything in addition to the thank you letters? Like sending out small gifts or magnets or anything of that nature?
Yeah, so no, we don't. We keep talking about getting some better department swag. We've got some we got some chapstick that's very popular when we recruit grad students. And we have some color changing pencils. We should probably up our game in the swag department. But if it's several $1,000s, the dean will write a personal note or make a thank you call. And often, if it's a large donation, the dean already knows that person anyway. So it's nice for them to catch up. But
absolutely.
Yeah. We don't really give out certificates or swag. It's just letters.